You are all over YouTube or taking lessons or listening to tips from friends, but you often forget the basic fundamentals and the foundation of your golf swing. Whether you're a senior golfer, beginner golfer, or single digit handicap, we easily forget some of the most important tenets to having a decent golf swing. By just some simple reminders and changes, we can make it so much easier to make a backswing, to make a downswing, to get a solid impact and to get through the ball with more consistency. And if you don't get some of these things right, you are just going to be making life so much harder. So we've got a quick lesson today that's going to give you a couple of reminders and a couple of things that I think if you try will improve your golf swing immediately, both for irons and driver. Let's find out how. In today's lesson, because I don't want to go into too much detail about too many different aspects of the setup, we're just going to look at it from the front view here. You know, I was giving some lessons earlier today and we covered a lot of this stuff. And I just thought, you know what, I'll put the camera out and we'll have a quick reminder to all of you. So let's just start with the iron, right? We're going to look at the differences between a driver and an iron, at least setup wise and swing thought wise. But what we often see, okay, let's go over some of the mistakes initially, all right? A lot of the mistakes initially are, we're so sort of incorrectly focused on hitting at the ball, that what happens is, just over time or as a natural occurrence, we are just too stacked over the golf ball and a bit skew-if. And this type of setup is what we see, where the hips are too far back, the ball is too far forward, and our upper body is kind of leaning over because we are thinking about hitting this stupid little ball up in the air. So if my intent and focus is there, it's actually a bit counterintuitive to not do it, but I'm thinking I want to hit this ball and I've got to lift it up. So that's why it moves in front. Generally, we have it a bit too far forward. Our hips are sort of behind because even though we're thinking we've got to hit down and whatever, it's like this feeling we've got to lift the ball up somehow. And when we have the shoulders a bit too steep over this way, a bit over, it encourages that hitting at the ball. So even with a perfect backswing, golf swing or whatever, with a setup like this, it is extremely hard to make a nice looking golf swing that delivers the results. Like if I set up something like this, okay, and I try and get some nice flow, I mean this feels very weird for me, but let's try, okay? So we're gonna go, all right, okay, I managed it, but it was a lot more work than need be. And that tendency sort of can creep in over time, or it's just what you already do. And if you find that your shots are sort of cutting to the right or whatever, then, and just kind of catching a few shots heavy, or you're catching behind the ball, it might be because you're set up, all right? So here's a couple of checkpoints that we're going to look at specifically for the iron, all right? All right, first of all, you can do this. Get up out your chair, okay? I'm waiting, get up out your chair. You don't really even need a club for this. I want you, if you have a club, great. I want you to hold the grip just out in front of you. Now notice how I've got the shaft not completely dead straight, I've got it on a slight angle, okay? Now, I've got my natural position here, but what I'm going to focus on is my actual hips being a little bit more dynamically poised, so they're on a slight sort of angle and this leg is kicked in just ever so slightly. But I'm not doing it down here, okay? I'm not trying to re-correct myself down here, because that's where we get into a right old pickle. We have to kind of try and preset it as much as possible. So that's why I say we come up to the top here, right? So we match this shaft angle to the spine angle that we actually want, because we don't want it dead straight. We definitely don't want it over this way. We want a slight tilt. Why? Because that's going to enable us to get behind the ball a bit easier, but deliver the club in the right sort of momentum, but angle of attack, where we can shift the weight forward and it actually does flatten out to get the strike that we want. It happens. You don't really have to worry about it. But if you are too far over, we can't shift the weight forward. So if you're watching videos saying, I've got to get the weight shift, you're just going to get worse and worse and worse. And this is what happens a lot of the time. So grab a club, push your hips about 3 inches forward, okay? Now we're matching the spine angle with the shaft here, and I'm just putting the hands, lowering the hands down. That is it. And we want the ball position. I've got a little stick here, okay? We want the ball position with a iron. I generally like to keep it pretty much the same throughout. You know, we're about a club head, okay? It's going to vary depending on certain shots you want to hit, but we want about a club head inside the lead foot. So I'm setting my hip tilt, I'm setting my weight about 65-45% here, okay? That's key. And now I'm lowering myself down, and I've got a slight flex in my knees. But what you can see is now, just by natural occurrence, my head is slightly tilted, my spine is slightly tilted, and from here I can shift momentum to make a much easier backswing and through swing. Just by doing that, it's more dynamic, it's more athletic. Now, if you don't know already, I often suggest to turn the right foot out. If you are a bit pigeon-toed or even straight, it's going to encourage you to just sort of keep this locked and kind of force a narrow turn here. Whereas we want that pull and extension up to the backswing. It's much easier to have this foot sort of turned out. See that? It just enables it to happen much easier. So there's the sort of general iron setup. And as far as like the differences with swing goes, right? Remember, we're just talking about the setup here. We want a firm grip, we want loose wrists, and that weight pressure is going to shift slightly just as we sort of start the swing. And when we've got the hips forward, we do actually want the hips to move back just a couple of inches as we start our swing and then turn behind us. Why? Because if you were to throw a ball, if you're going to do anything, and some of the best hitters in the world all do this, it's not just turning behind, okay? The maximum speed, effortless speed, comes from a slight lateral shift and move back. It's a dynamic move, and that's what you have to remember. It's about flow, it's about effortlessness. So, a wonderful visual, aside from that sort of setup here and that checkpoint of the arms, about the ball position, okay? The other little checkpoint we can do is to feel like when we're making our swing, can we when we set up, can we feel the weight of the club? Am I static? Am I always moving? I want my feet to be in movement. I want my arms to be in movement. I've got a solid hold on the grip, but I can start my swing like so. And I'm prepared to set up that way. I'm not closed, my shoulders are square, my hips are square, but I am dynamically ready to make a swing and to effortlessly get through the ball, all right? A little bit heavy on that one, if I'm honest, but it's not always easy waffling and chatting away. But as far as swing differences go from an iron, we do want that shift where, as if we were to imagine like a wall right here, okay? We're almost swinging around that point with an iron, okay? And we're getting ahead of it by the time we come into impact. See that? Because we want the low point after. It's much easier to do that when you get the setup right. So, we want to imagine this wall, and we actually shift past it and then pull back. With the driver, it's a little bit different because we want to sling it through there. So let's go on to the driver. Okay, same issues we see, but just exaggerated more often than not. Ball way too far forward because you're told to hit up on it, but the body is all skew-if, the shoulders are open, There's just no, if I set up like this, yes, I'm exaggerating, but it's impossible for this ball not to go sort of low and then cut to the right. Even with, a good golf swing, it can't do anything apart from cut to the right, which is a common issue, right? So what do? Very similar. There are differences between driver and iron, but we want it pretty damn similar. Now this is where the wall comes in very handy. We generally want the ball positioned over the left ear, okay? So that's where we want it to be, over the left ear. Now, you want to have, I would say, about 60% of the weight on the right foot, okay? And we still want that hip bump forward. But remember, we want to generally do it from up here, okay? Not making ourselves all wiggly at the bottom, because that's when it just doesn't work. So pre-set it as much as you can. Now, sometimes people stand too narrow. It's usually a bit better to stand narrower than wider. If you stand too wide, your swing very much becomes upper body dominant and will look something like this, okay? And look something like that, because you haven't got great mobility or whatever it might be. So how do we know how far to stand apart with the feet? Very easy. I don't want you to think too much about this, but get up out your chair again. Okay, I'm waiting. Now I want you to just jump more or less as high as you can and just land, okay? There is about the width for your driver. That's as natural as you're going to get, because this is your natural sort of stabilizing balance point, and we want that for maximum distance and control with the longest club in the bag. All right, so that little test of just doing a jump, see how the feet just gradually sort of move out. Don't think about it too much, but more or less there, you can adjust it a little bit, but that's going to give you a good baseline to start from. All right, now as far as ball position goes, we want this off the left heel, okay? But we don't want our head too far ahead. As I said, we want the ear to be there. We don't want the hands too far back. We want them hanging pretty naturally, more or less like this. They can be back a little bit straighter, not so much like an iron, but we want to make this position as natural as possible. So from here, that's where we have our setup. Now see how my shoulders are tilted, my hips are tilted. It means that I've got a much greater chance of success to be able to have a shallower angle of attack and have a sweeping action. And the more you can think about the driver as like a sweep from here, almost like pushing it through, you're going to get less spin on it. You're going to get longer drives and straighter, which is pretty cool. But there's your setup checkpoint. Ball position, the hips aligned, and the head. And then we might often just prefer to tuck in the right elbow just a little bit more, so the shoulders are just a hair closed. But as I said, we're just focusing on this sort of position here. All right, I'm a bit too wide there. Now, if you find you're not quite comfortable in how you're setting up, just place your hands on the thighs and slide down to your trail side here till you almost touch your knee, and that's about where you need to be. Okay, that's the setup. And remember, we want this to be dynamic, so we want to always be moving, okay, always be moving to be able to swing back and forwards. But here's the little swing bonus tip that we talked about with the line for the irons. Okay, we're sort of getting ahead of it there, but it only works if we get the setup right. With the driver, we actually want to be staying back of that line, as if there's a wall here. The body stays back, but the hands, the club, the arms, everything sort of slings through like a catapult, and we're up that way, because that's showing that we're getting an upswing and we're accelerating through with a firm, confident release. So we stay behind that line. Irons, we get ahead. Driver, we're staying behind just a little bit. So drill those in, use those checkpoints, use a mirror, do whatever you need to, but get those foundations right, okay? Always a firm grip, always very loose wrists. Feel the ground in your feet, stay alive, and just swing away, okay? You know, yes, watch the other videos about takeaway backswing, how to transition, but get the setup right, otherwise you're just going in circles. So there you have it, a very quick summary of a couple of checkpoints I want you to utilize. If you like that, let me know. And if you have any questions, let me know. But yeah, this is basics, golf swing basics, getting the setup right for driver and irons. And then from there, you refine that even more and you get better and better by improving your swing. All right.